I've been waiting all day for this. Baron, my handsome man.
Hi, human.
Hey, babe, you ready? All right, let's roll it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Soul Sense, where I'm really excited today because not only do I have a friend joining us for a conversation, but someone who's very inspirational to me. I'm going to introduce to you Greg Moss. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
What I do. So I wear many hats in the community, but I think the most appropriate for our call today is I am a certified life coach. I really love that entire realm of helping people find those little gems within themselves and applying it to their world and opening things up, making things accessible and going after some, really cool goals. Coming from the coaching perspective is probably the most helpful.
The coaching world. I love that. And I'm going to ask you what brought you here, because when I met you, when we first met, you were very much in the world of movement, right? And massage and that kind of thing. And then over the years that I've known you, it's been this beautiful transition from teaching that to coaching. So how have you made that transition? How has that been?
Yeah, I think it started in massage first, getting really good kind of manual skills of how do I help people when they're on the table and I'm working with them. And that's what led me to movement of, okay, these people are only on the table for so long and they're moving their body 24/7, or maybe not moving for the full 24/7, but they're with their body. Like that's where the empowerment is going to come from. They have more chance to change things than I do in treatment. So I went into movement, looking at what makes good movement, what makes, where are these faults coming from? What can we do here? And that started to go really well. And then finding fun in movement and, the strength that comes with that. And then I was kind of left with just the mindset piece left. Like I could teach people how to do great things for their body and I could do great things with them when they were there. And then there was still that other layer on top. Some people thrive, some people didn't. But when I looked at them, like everyone should be thriving. And it's the mindset piece. Was the big thing. And then the other thing too is in my new assessments, I'd always ask people kind of like just out of curiosity what they do, helps me understand kind of what their body's doing, but also just in general, like people can live more experiences than I can live. So I want to like learn from people. And then I started also asking them like, do you love it? And the amount of people that hesitated or flat out said no. And it was like, oh, hold on a second. What's going on here? And then I started to see, well, there's actually some trends. The people that are loving what they do, they tend to be more invested in and those were the ones that were typically getting much better or leaning more. And so I started to see a little bit of, just some trends that I wanted to explore. And when I looked at different models of, what background did I currently have? What would be easy to step into? What would be enjoyable to step into? And I kind of made my way to the coaching model.
What is your favorite part of coaching people? What is the thing that you love the most? The thing that keeps you coming back?
The possibility. Possibility and just how diverse it is. Like everybody's coming in with different goals, different issues that they want fixed, or different goals in general. And those are two very different kind of pathways. And as diverse as things are, there's these commonalities that are really nice to just kind of see in these trends. And, a situation may look very different between two people, but actually there's some very common things going on between them. And, just kind of trying to explore those universal truths or just see those, like when everything's boiled down, when we get out of all of like the story of it, what's left at the bottom and what are the things that tend to work and just seeing that simplicity brought in and how different that can look on the outside for people.
I like that. And it's interesting because sometimes we get stuck in these old models. So I'm going to refer to one of the old models and nothing against this model because it works very well for some people and not for others. So NA for me, as someone who is going through recovery, NA, Narcotics Anonymous, was an organization that didn't work for me. And the reason that it didn't is because we would show up, once a week or multiple times a week to sit down and go back through the trauma or the addiction or the thing that we were moving through. And I understand that that's a big piece of it, but I felt like it was a lot of reoccurring going back to the muck, going back to sit in the place. And one thing that I don't really feel like we had a lot of was sort of uplifting positive things outside of just the structure of what NA was, that your steps and your things that you do. One thing I really gravitated towards heavily in my recovery, and I didn't really know at the time I was doing it, was a strengths-based approach, was finding things in my life that were really working and then barreling into those things a little bit more. And then in doing that, realizing all of the other aspects of myself that I was really, things I was good at, things I wanted to improve at, that kind of thing. So it took two very, very different approaches. Both work. I'm not saying one doesn't work and the other one does. I'm saying they both work for different people. But what are your thoughts on that outside of recovery? Because I know in your world, you only focus on a sort of strength-based model.
Yeah, for the most part, I think coaching naturally tends to that way. And I think part of that is it's very forward focused. So the difference of coaching would be current to future is where we live and work. Coaching is from here forward typically, and therapy would be more, let's go into the past and sort that out to change the trajectory of the future and how you're currently feeling as well.
Sometimes too, or how would you speak to this? Even sometimes too with people in a lot of ways that old traditional therapy or counseling services work, and they still do, is when we tend to go back, we don't think about, someone's revisiting a trauma or an addiction or a different piece. We don't tend to think about what would have been the wins in a situation, right? So we don't tend to look at in all of what they consider to be negative, what a positive piece of that situation would be. And so I want to pick your brain a little. What happens to people, and everyone has a little bit of a thought on this. What happens to people when the only thing that they're living in is the trauma and the negative weight? When there's no indicator of the things that they did well or that they're doing well? What kind of cloud hangs over that situation?
Yeah, so I think we often I automatically go back to the energy model quite from my main teaching from unpack, because it seems to just fit. It's like the matrix. Like once you see it, and in a situation like this, I see that when people are stuck in those types of positions, they're either going to take the victim energy role, right, where everything is happening to them, very little chance to change, and that's not a very empowered place. That is very much on the receiving end of things, and there's no the ability to change things is very low. Or you've got the fighter energy being up a bit, which is, at least there's a bit of spark to it. There's progress, there's force to make things change. But with that, it's either non-sustainable or there's collateral damage. And eventually it will burn out. And so it's very common if somebody is in a place of, on the receiving end of things, not feeling like they can change, that they would get very angry to try and force a change from the perspective that they want to see. Whereas, that's a very different approach than if somebody is being very more rationalizing, more forgiving, more cooperative, working with somebody. That becomes sustainable. That may not be the fastest way to get somewhere, but it's at least sustainable, and there's not a lot of excess damage that would come from that, which is why it becomes sustainable. So I think going back to what's that fog, I think everybody's felt that fog of when they're in something and they can't make a change despite what they're doing, or they've pushed really hard and yes, they've made some change, but look what happened on the side, or I burnt out and then I had to step back and the thing kind of got big again, and then I had to push forward and really hard again, and I'm not always necessarily getting ahead. Or you may be able to push ahead and hit a milestone and then it flips into sustainable. And then it was it was worth the fight. It was worth the struggle because now I'm here and I'm level. But there is that kind of those two zones before you get there that don't feel overly great.
Right.
So
There's
my
kind of
guess
that
would
discomfort.
discomfort. That gray would be kind of one of those colors that are associated with that kind of the victim, or like that inability to change. Like it's just heavy, it's thick,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
yeah.
What are some of the most intense behaviors you've noticed in coaching that are hard to change? Because what, when you and I are both taking whichever approach it is that we're working with a client, one of the things that we have to consider in positions that we're in and offering that support is that these behaviors sometimes with people have been there for a lifetime, right? And so it's not really a switch that we can flip quickly, whether it's incorporating new positive behaviors into your day, new positive thought patterns into your day, not playing the victim in your own story. What advice or what kind of guidance do you give for someone who keeps running into that victim role? What is the thing that we're actually asking for if we're that person? What is the thing that we're looking for when we're always in the victim role?
Yeah. So I think a sense of empowerment is a piece. Um, or they're looking for help. That's the other place to be, is because if you're not doing it yourself, then others who like to help will be more attracted to that kind of situation, and that can also work really well, of taking that position so that somebody can step in and do the work with you, for you, any of that. um, and I think, sorry, the other part of your question was something. People like to default back to what they know, and I don't think that that's necessarily a problem that needs to be fixed. I think it's very
Mhm.
natural, it's very human to do that. So I think uh, one of the things is finding out the right amount of stretch for somebody that's appropriate for them, because everybody can make changes, everybody can, can have an absolutely, huge ass idea that they want to work towards. And it's just finding the appropriate amount of change at that time, knowing that with enough of those stacked in a row, you will get the thing that you're going for. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's just human nature. I don't think it's something, like I said, I don't think it's something that's a problem. It's just something to be aware of, is there's an appropriate amount of change that people can handle. And different people have different capacities for that.
And time that it'll take. I like that. One of the big pieces that I'm learning about as I move into a bit more of counseling recovery, and one thing that I've kind of stumbled across recently that I really love, that I think ties in very well to the mindfulness piece of how you coach, is mindfulness-based relapse recovery for people battling with addiction, substance. It doesn't have to be substance. Addiction could be gambling, it could be shopping, it could be any of those things. And I think one of the things that we've always focused on a lot in recovery from addictions is that, for a long time, we really thought it was one size fits all. You go to this place, you do the thing, you go through the steps, we should all get it, everybody moves forward. And then what we see is, a lot of the patterns tend to repeat itself. One of the pieces that they're leaning towards more now with recovery is the mindfulness piece of it. And I think the reason that I love this so much is it's almost a forgiving piece of self. I think when we can be mindful about our recovery, there also comes the forgiveness that comes along with that. What are your thoughts on taking the approach you take? Because I know that maybe for you think it's a little strange that we haven't adapted to it already completely through all of the, sort of organizations. But how do you think that a mindfulness-based approach to recovery is going to benefit people in a different way?
Yeah, so the forgiveness piece right away, right, that you were already mentioning, is a huge thing. So that's a very different energetic place to come from than fighting, victim, blah, whatever that is. Like, forgiveness is huge, and forgiveness has baked into it acceptance of the situation, right? You need to be able to accept that something is what it is and not something else first. And it doesn't mean that you need to agree with it. Acceptance and agreement are two very different things. But it's accepting where things are, because that puts you at the present. That puts you at the playing field of, now there's decisions that can be made. There's choices. We can actually change this. Now that we've kind of said, this is it. Boom. Welcome to the present. Now let's start doing some stuff that may change the trajectory of the future. And that's pretty cool. And so forgiveness is a big piece of that, because if you're going to be trying to make change, being able to put down the baggage of the past is a nice way to make that journey lighter. there's less crap that you're pulling forward into, I want this different future. Okay, then let's not take those heavy parts of the past with us too into that. Let's look at that. Let's assimilate that. Let's learn from that, and then let's put it down and really step into something different.
Lord, it's hard sometimes. Here's what I find, I think, and again, I'm not going to speak for everybody else. I'm going to speak to myself and maybe my experience. And some of the things I find really hard, or the reasons that people working with addiction, in my experience, substance, sometimes it's hard to put down the pieces of the past and walk forward from it because they attach so wholeheartedly to the addiction or recovery lifestyle, right? Like if I walk away, so say I've been battling with substance for several years, I attach to the label of an addict. I go through all of the steps that I need to go through to change that behavior. And then I get to the end of it and I'm still carrying this weight of being an addict because it makes me feel like I've done the work. If that makes sense. There's a credibility.
Badge of honor.
You're right, that I've been through it. But there's this piece of me, unlike a lot of addicts or people who I've worked alongside with substance, I don't attach to being an addict anymore. I don't walk into a room and say, "Hi, I'm Ashley. I have mental health issues, and I'm an addict." It's just not how I do it.
But
I'm
look
Ashley.
at all the stuff I'm doing, right?
Yeah. I look at it as I'm Ashley, and if the topic comes up, it's like, "Oh yeah, I had a thing with addiction back here," but I don't need to keep carrying it with me as that badge of honor to move forward. So for people who feel like they need to keep holding and like living in it and attaching to the label of it, first off, what can we offer them to let go of that label? But then also, what damage maybe are we actually doing by continuing to hold on to the label that holds on to all the stuff that we really just need to set down?
Yeah. Well, and when we look at, I don't want to say normal behaviors. It's not like our average social behavior. When people are introducing themselves or through that, like we don't typically do that, right? We don't have to promote who we've been, where we've come from, all of this stuff. Like in an interview, that's different. If somebody's saying like, what's your previous history and work and da. Like there's very set situations where we kind of go into the past, but it's not something that we typically we launch into every time we're
Child of
in
divorce,
a situation. Yeah. Single parent, not single parent, right? It's just we go out and we are who we are. Maybe what do you do? All of those like superficial kind of, trying to sort people out when we first meet them kind of things. But and I think that like you were talking about, like some people want to hold on to it as proof, right, of the journey that they've gone through. And if you've ever looked at the hero's journey, right, which is like the skeleton of every story that we ever tell about somebody coming up against something difficult and then coming out ahead, it's a very much a big part of, that arc that we keep going through. And that arc is very cyclical. And I think some people get caught in certain parts of that or feel like they need to hold on to old parts of the story to validate.
And then when you look at something like substance and the stigma that goes with it, what is the impact that has on our mindset if we hold on to something that has such a negative stigma, but we hold on to it as a badge of honor? And are we actually preventing ourselves from stepping into the full level of recovery and what we need? Because the same way that snakes shed their skin, we can do that as well with our old self and let that go. So I always find this a very not confusing, but interesting conversation to have, because I have some people who have been through recovery who look at me disgraced that I no longer attach to it. Like I've let go of my badge of honor and I don't want to like walk into a room and shine it to everyone and be like, yo, who I am. Who I was versus who I am now. And who that person was is why I am the way that I am now. But then I guess this for me brings up the conversation, and this may be a bit of a touchy conversation or a thing, and so I want to have it in this uncomfortable conversation. I also notice people do it with traumas, right? So I got through, let me give you my bio, and now I'm here doing the thing to move forward. And sometimes when I want to learn about somebody, those are actually the least important pieces. And I'm always curious, again, is moving through trauma the same thing, a kind of a badge of honor, and we don't want to let go of it, so we hold on to it? And what impacts do those have on us in being able to move forward?
Yeah. And I think it really depends on the situation, the scenario, the type of conversation. Like I think there's definitely absolutely times to categorize that, look at that, put that out, make sense of it. And then there's other times of where are you now? Where are you trying to get to? What are the steps between where you are and here? Like that's an interesting, that's something that we can change and that we can work with, and we can do that. We can influence that. We can replay the past. We can't influence the past. We can't go back and change that and muck that up. We can change how we think about it for sure. And how we think is definitely how we navigate everything, right? As soon as you're in front of something, the way you think about it is going to dramatically influence the way that you interact with it. So for sure, but the level of influence is, are you wanting to reflect and learn? Are you wanting to influence and direct? Yeah, I think yeah,
It's,
very different
I like your answer, and
purposes.
I think that there are, yeah, it's funny. I find we're at a time now where I feel, and I try to be really cautious with my words. Um, Sometimes I think it's relevant for a situation, and sometimes I feel that just a person showing up as a strong person is enough of an impact, and it doesn't need to come with all of the things that are before. And so I was just curious also too, when we hold on to the, if I woke up every day and said to myself, one of the first things I ever said to myself is, I'm an addict,
Yeah.
even though it's been
Well,
4 years from doing that, what is the message I'm sending to myself?
right. So like neurologically, what are you practicing from that, right? Because whatever
Yes.
your definition of an addict is going to flavor the way that you move forward if you hold that title, right? If somebody says, I'm an athlete versus I'm a triathlon athlete versus I'm a swimmer, all of those are very different, right? You're gonna make choices based on that profile that you're choosing to live, right? The athlete who's a triathlon is going to do XYZ. The athlete who's a swimmer is going to do XYZ. The person who says that they're an addict, whatever their definition of an addict, and everybody is walking around with their own definition
Mm-hmm.
and their own. There may be like some similarities for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but there's all of those minutia details of whatever your interpretation of an addict is. You're going to make those like, oh, okay, an addict does this, an addict doesn't do this. So it already starts to flavor how you are going to make decisions as you step forward. And so that narrative of, if you're waking up every day with that, right, that's you're
Yeah.
practicing it. You get really good at what you practice, whether that's movement, whether that's thoughts, whether that's breath, whatever you're practicing every day is what you're going to get really good at. um, and yeah, be really careful of the narrative that you're telling yourself, and what are those things that you're waking up, um, and change the narrative if that's, if the different, either like if you're waking up, admitting that you're an addict, that can be really helpful at a certain
Mm-hmm.
stage of the journey, right? Because if you're not admitting that and it is the case, then that maybe is the first step towards change, is that acceptance and and an acknowledgement. And then there's a time when you're no longer an addict, and you're whatever the term is that you want to put in there, but you're no longer the
Right.
addict.
Right. And we can let go of those labels. And I think that we live in a society where we like to label everything. And I think that it's actually one of the biggest, um, it's one of the things that hinders our growth the most. I feel we live in this, sometimes we don't question why it is we think a certain way or we feel a certain way about certain things. And I think also the way that my personal shift changed with my view of addiction is I had to sit back and realize why it was I felt shame, embarrassment, all of these things going through my recovery. And it was because it was other people's idea of what addiction was. And I was looking through the lens of other people's values and other people's thoughts on addiction, not my own. And so I had to step back and reinvent that for myself and what that was. And to me now, when I think of addicts, we're survivors. there's a strength in us, I think, a resiliency that I admire. So when someone, immediately says to me that they have attachment to or have dealt with addiction, I immediately see like a warrior. To me, that's what I see. I don't see it the opposite way. So
Yeah.
my story of what someone battling with addiction is a really great story in my mind of who they are, and also especially if they're on the other side of recovery, that they've overcome something much stronger than addiction, which is the pain that caused the addiction, right, in the first place, because that's kind of where it all starts. So I see it all as warriors, and I think societally we need to change how it is that we see these people. Nobody turns to an addiction or a substance of some point. I don't think out of boredom a lot of the time. I think, we do it mostly because there's something we're running from. So if that's kind of the message that I would give to people, is when we see that, think of those people as survivors. They've been through more than we actually could understand, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, addiction is interesting, right? Because there's a level of focus there. There are decision, like there's a lot of decision making power in that pursuit. And there is a lot of strength to that, right? Some people are, and it's got me thinking right now. There's a lot of,
No, and I
yeah.
actually like how you said it is we're good at what we do, right? So we do get good at all of those things. And I think a lot of the time what addicts or people in recovery or people with addiction feel is that we just constantly we're really good at screwing up. But there's actually a lot of other hard and soft skills within all of the things that we're doing that we can then take and transition into our new world. So when you say that, there's a lot of commitment to doing the thing that we maybe know we shouldn't do. So when we can shift those powers for good instead of, evil in our own lives, the potential is.
Well, and that's where, when you look at somebody's expression of their addiction and you lean into a strength-based model, you probably have a lot of good fucking apples to pull from in terms of, let's just repurpose this. You are really, really good at this and really good at this. You're resourceful in this way. Your decision making is spot on when it's honed in this direction. And the reason we're doing this work is because you're choosing to change the direction. So let's repurpose those skills. Let's pick up some new ones along the way or change the expression of them. And let's change the direction that you're heading in. But let's use what you've got already, because it's already really good at doing what it is that you're currently doing. And that strength-based model. So when you were saying, like, I often just get the list of the problems or the issues with somebody and not the strengths. And I feel like that's a really missed gap.
Yeah.
Because that's going to give you some solid start, some stuff to work with.
I think with anything in life, so I didn't mean to cut you off, and that's where we have to start, is always with strength-based. Conversation with a partner, what's going right? Here's some stuff we can work on. Conversation with your son. Here's all the ways in which today was really great. There's a couple things we got to talk about that maybe weren't so great, but I think it's also what we're not used to, right? Is the validation first that comes along with all of the things we're doing well. Especially for me, there was no one sitting at the end of the day being like, and you made it through another day without touching your substance. And that is a huge win,
huge
right?
Props,
it's
right? Yeah.
Huge, but it's maybe here's all the ways in which you fell down today, right? And so it does change the mentality. And I think it changes the mentality of how we want to recover as well from things in our life, whether it is substance, whether it's a relationship, whether it's the loss of someone. There is acceptance and radical acceptance actually in what it is. We may not like who we were or what we did, but we have to accept it happened in order to move forward with that. And even that is looking at the positive of a situation. Why is radical acceptance so hard for people?
Why are radical acceptance? I think there's still a lot of judgment baked around acceptance. I don't think people are really letting go of judgment. That's a really high, I think that's a difficult thing for a lot of people to do. And I think if we're going to radical acceptance, I think we need to assume that there is a great deal of that baked in, of, really being able to put down the judgment and just accept. And radical acceptance. I like that term. Yeah, fire some stuff at me. What is
So I
your
mean,
thought of radical acceptance? Give me some.
is that I can't go back in a lot of ways. So a lot of poor decisions were made when I was using drugs, cocaine. You're kind of lost in this cycle of you're feeling pain. The only thing you're really thinking about is yourself. A lot of that when you're in as deep as you are, and you hurt people, and you make decisions that are very selfishly driven. And there's a lot of ways in which you can't go back sometimes to make amends with individuals if it's going to upset their life, if it's going to, I want to make amends with everyone in my life that maybe perhaps was on the shitty end of my substance abuse. However, sometimes going back is going to disrupt their life more. So I don't selfishly again get to take something for me and put it on somebody else. So in some situations, I just have to radically accept that my behavior was something that happened. I can't go back and change it. I don't like it, but I can't go back to change it. So I have to accept it and I have to move forward because I can live in the real of beating myself up over and over again. What if I had a chance to do it differently? Even living in the real of reaching out to make amends with someone, you have to accept that it's just not something that's attainable, right? That peace. I find a lot of the time in addiction, especially when it comes to substance, when you lose people, right? I lost a friend in May to an overdose. COVID, resources weren't around, fentanyl, all of these things going on. You sit back and you think of all the what if I had just called? What if I had done this? Death is another thing where we have to radically accept that it's happened. We don't like it, but it's happened. And we also have to accept what it is we feel around it. And so I think there is acceptance, which can come one way or the other. We can accept something's not working out the way that we want, so we're going to keep pushing towards it, or we accept that something's not going to work out the way we want, so we just settle into it. But I think radical acceptance is the big thing where maybe we just have to settle in self that that's the way it is, right? And we can't always go back and change things and make amends all the time, especially if it hurts people more.
And like you were saying, right, acceptance doesn't have to be giving up. Acceptance is
No.
an appreciation for what is. And like you even just said there, you can either accept what it is and push differently, right? Or make different decisions, right? Like as soon as you kind of just go, okay, this is what it is, it just brings you up to the most up-to-date version. And then you can decide differently. Sidestep to the right if you need to, do whatever, push a bit harder if that's what it is, or take a step back, or co-create, bring more people in, let people go, whatever the situation requires to get towards where it is that you're trying to go. Acceptance is going to be that first piece to it. Awareness, I would say, is the first piece. Awareness is the first piece, then acceptance, and then making sure that then once those two kind of, you've checked the box of those, then making sure that you have an intention set and that you have the means to pull it off.
Yeah,
So
I
you
like
kind of
that.
need
And
that.
you need that. And I think that a lot of the time when we do go back and feel like we want to right wrongs or do things that way, we feel righteous in what we're doing and it's right. And I want to go back and do this thing. But sometimes we don't think about how it could affect people in their life and where they are now and what they've been through. And so I think that with awareness and acceptance and that forgiveness, there's a lot of it, right? And then we have to forgive ourselves to understand that we're not perfect, nor is anyone else. I know that mistakes of my past are just many of the mistakes I'm going to make in my life because I plan on making plenty more moving into the future.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I can promise myself is that that's going to happen. What is the hardest roadblock you think for people when they get stuck in that cycle of not accepting things? Like, why is it almost like self-harm when we don't want to accept things and we live in these negative reels of stuff? Is that kind of how you could classify that? Or what is the piece that we're missing when we don't want to accept things?
When you don't want to accept things, I think when you don't accept something, it's almost like hitting the pause button on needing to do something different yet. I think that's a piece, is it because you're not quite caught up to the future with, or the present with it yet, it's like, oh, there's still some time. There's still some play that could be done here before we now have to do something with it, right? There's the
Right.
pieces that it's the study for the test at 5 minutes before the test. It's the like, I just hold on a sec, just hold on, right?
Right.
It's all the cramming of sorting out and all of that stuff. I think there's there's that rush into, but I think it's like there's some play that still needs to happen before, okay, what do we want to do with this? Before you're ready to step into forgiveness, cooperation, responsibility, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because shit gets real once you've accepted it. And it's like, okay, now that we're here, what do we want to do is the next piece. That's always like, that's the question. That's the thing that comes up after you've accepted that, is what do you want to do now? It's time to go on record as setting an intention based on this. And before that, you maybe don't need to.
Okay.
Um,
I like that.
I
If I
think,
was
and I
to
think
ask,
I think it's okay to just accept that you don't have an answer yet as well. Like, it's okay to, accept something. And what would you like to do about that now? I'd like to spend some more time looking at my options or things like that's okay. That's okay to do. But it still gets that stamp of things are as they are, and you actually, come up to it. And sorry, I cut you off. You were going to say?
no, you didn't. No, I kind of jumped in because the reason I think I'm so attracted to acceptance is because it is one of my core values. My two values that I live my life through the lens of right now, because I think my values are prone to change the way they have over my life. But acceptance and leadership are the two ways in which I have to show up in my life, and everything has to funnel through those. And when I tell people that, they often think that acceptance is like that, always forging forward to do the thing. But sometimes the acceptance is sitting back and going, that just wasn't meant to be, or, leading myself out of the thing that I thought was meant to be. So it's interesting because of those two values that I have, they go both ways. I'm either leading myself into the fire or being like, this isn't where you're supposed to be, and moving back the other way. So I think that's why there's a lot of acceptance that has to happen in our lives all the time. And one of the biggest pieces, I think, is maybe just accepting the fact that things can be different than the way that they were, right? That it can just be something different. And I kind of want to put you on the spot as the values guy. If I was to ask you what your core values are right now at this point in my life, are those, like, is that really quick and rapid fire for you?
Yeah, acceptance is way up there. And I would say anyone that knows me, I think could say that that's definitely something that comes off is whatever it is that's coming in, whether that's something that you're saying, there's no spike. There's no change in motion of this is what it is. And that's the nice thing with when you really practice acceptance at, all the time, or as much as you can, right? Is when you live up to your values, it means that you can stay who it is that you want to be, regardless of the situation. And acceptance is one of those values that really help you get there fast, or get there, right? You need to be able to accept yourself, things as they are. Someone spilt milk, okay, like that. There's no spike in emotion of what are you weren't being careful enough, you weren't. Look, you don't need to go down that roller coaster if you're just objective. Observe, that happened. So and so did something. This person said that thing. This thing didn't go the way I wanted it. These numbers are up. These numbers are down. Like, okay, like, acceptance is a pretty cool. It's a value of mine, and it's something that I find very helpful. And I would say growth is another core value of constantly learning, helping other people grow myself. And family is a great and a nice value that pops up too, and it's a nice anchoring value that for myself. I have a nice family life, and it's something that I choose. Like, values are the way that you make decisions, right? That's one of the biggest things. Is any situation that comes up, you put all of your values over it. Which ones light up? Which ones don't? Does this thing counter your values, or does it align with your values? And that will kind of guide you of how you lean into something, away from something, how you make choices between two great things, two crappy things, whatever, right? Like it's how you make your decisions. And so for myself, family is one of those filters that I put on something is what am I trying to do with my son, with my wife, and with the rest of my family, and does this align with those goals?
I like that. And I think that values is something that we actually don't tap into enough. And I just speak based on my knowledge from, say, my clients or people that I work with. The majority of everyone has no idea what their values are, or it's been a long time since they've looked at it, or they have this grand scale of values that maybe they grew up with that they haven't questioned. And then is the value
Yeah.
they have their great great grandmother's, or actually is it their value? And I think that
Yeah.
that's where a lot of my value check came in with my addiction, is I always felt shame around it, but it was because I was looking at who I was through the lens of someone else's values, because that's what I was raised with, and I never questioned it. And I never took a moment where I sat back and went, maybe your values aren't the same as your parents, and that's fucking okay. Maybe your values aren't the same, and maybe they never questioned their values that they got from their parents and their parents. And then we're
Yeah.
living in a time that isn't even up to date with where we are
No.
right now and how we're supposed to be. So I think that people, if there's one thing I can encourage everyone to do, is sit down and really, whether it's working through an exercise or a coaching session or whatever it is, to figure out what your values are, but to also make sure that you don't have different sets of values for different things in your life. It's just one set of values, whether it's 5. I love Brene Brown's idea that really there only is 2 that everything falls under the umbrella of. But really honing in on what those are and knowing what those are, I think is really important, because then you do move that way. You move through acceptance, growth, family, leadership and acceptance, and everything becomes easier. I think sometimes our uncertainty comes from the idea that we have no idea who we are sometimes or what we
Yeah.
value.
Yeah, values are one of my absolute favorite topics in coaching. It's one of the things that I do very early, like if not the first session, like we're getting in there pretty quick where it's appropriate. But typically, you want to know how people look at the world, and values are, and the way that they look at the world. Are they actually like, is that serving them, and are they doing that? People who say
Mm.
like, oh, I value X, Y, Z, and they're only expressing 1, 2, and 4, and you're like, hold up a second. You say that these are important to you, but your day to day is spent totally different. Like, do you understand why that feels like maybe life is not as fulfilling as it could be, or
Mm.
that things are difficult to decide? And yeah, where are those values coming from? Are those yours anymore? Did they serve you before and no longer do? And definitely one of the strongest recommendations is, at any point, reflect on your values. Print out, get on Google. Just put in list of values. There's so many different sheets that you can print off. And one of the things I get people to do is look at this list. Don't worry if you know the exact definition of the word, because ultimately it doesn't matter. It's whatever you think the word means is how you're going to interact with it. So look through this list. Everything that immediately is like, yes, that's important to me, put a little check mark beside it. See how many of that list light up. If there's any that didn't show up that you want to write down, perfect. Write it on the corner or at the bottom, wherever. And then go through that list again and start paring it down, right? Because you can, like, that getting down to 5 is a great,
Mm-hmm.
it really kind of forces you to make those decisions of what is it under pressure, what's ultimately important to you. And the nice thing with that experiment is it's okay to clip some and actually not give up on them. You don't have to, just because we're asking you to go down to 5 doesn't mean that those things aren't important. But what that does mean is push come to shove. If life was to really come down hard on you, how do you want to show up? What are the most important things, and what are you going to use to make those decisions? And yeah, if there are some values on there, you're like, well, this should be on my list. As soon as there's a should, there's an issue, right? Like, that's because now you're going to be forcing it, and you're going to judge anything that you're doing through the fact that it should. And I mean, there's definitely room to play with, I want to incorporate more of something, and you want to start turning a value on higher priority. That's okay. There is a difference of that versus this should be on my list.
Right.
I'm choosing to make this on my list is coming from a very different place, energetically, intention wise, as well as the amount of judgment that goes on in a situation. And yeah, once you have a really solid idea of what's important to you and how you're filtering all your decisions and how you're valuing things, your experiences, then you can also start to make choices that pilot you in the directions that you want to go. Um, and it would be really interesting to see, is that coming up in addictions work, right? Is our value
Mm.
assessments being done? Is there room for that? If it's not, is there value to that? And I would say there is probably value to that.
Oh, yeah.
They're
Yeah.
called values. It's baked
Yeah.
into it. Like
Yeah.
there's probably, and helping people understand where their values are coming from, which ones are maybe going to set them up. Because when you can change the way that people look and change the way that they make decisions, then you're creating change. And if people are wanting to create change, it's a really good place to go.
I also think doing values, you said in addiction, which is great. I think if you did it at the beginning of work with someone versus say you moved with them for a year over what recovery was, the values may change really beautifully from one side to the other. They may very much stay the same. And I realize that everyone listening probably thinks Greg and I are just like cold-hearted people because love did not come up on our values, but love. But for me, to
That's the
explain
bond for all of us.
to
Like
explain
that's a
that,
big
yeah,
thing.
it's just
Yeah.
but to explain that is there's love and acceptance and leadership for me, right? And I think that that's where a lot of people, like you said, get caught up, like family should be on my list or love should be on my list or whatever. And and why should it be? Because someone else feels like that should be the important thing that you value. But we do need to ask that. And for me, love and family and all of those things fall under the values that I've chosen. And I think that's the really great umbrella approach is if you do have 50 values that you've checked off and we're trying to narrow it down to 5, it doesn't mean that the ones you're leaving behind aren't there somewhere. It just means that there's a few stronger ones that they fall underneath of and that you can take that with you. But I definitely, like you, just put so much importance on figuring out what those are for everybody. We all need to do that.
Well, and going back to your comment of like, if you were to do a values work with somebody, and then maybe a year later or whenever, right? The other thing is the values themselves don't need to change, right? For somebody to go through like a rehab program or something, you don't need
Mm-hmm.
to change the values. We're looking at the expression of them. That's the other thing too, is what used to be, like if we pick whatever value, it may look maybe a bit destructive or something like that if somebody's in a living a lifestyle that they want to change because it's not going in the direction that they want. It's that flip. It's that, hey, you used to express this way, and that was maybe not what you're wanting to do anymore, and we can just start expressing it this other way.
I like that. I just can't get enough of talking to you when we do, because I always feel like I learn so much, and then now I'm excited to go and absorb that. I'll have to like lay down and take a nap just so I can learn it all properly.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. If you could leave one piece of advice, so we're not going to forget that the reason Greg and I are on the screen this way is it's COVID and we're living in this kind of uncertain time that
Yeah.
really is, we're in it now. Like it's not going anywhere. It's not this thing that we're hoping just ends. But what is some advice that you can give to someone right now who's still battling with maybe some mental health issues or a little bit of a rough patch, given that we are in this uncertain pandemic and just the stressors that we've had right now? What's some advice you would give for someone?
Yeah. So other than honestly, the going to the values, finding out what is valuable for you right now, finding expressions of that within the means that you have available to you. Because life feels good when we express our values, and the expression itself actually doesn't matter all that much internally. It's just whether we're getting to express it or not, and that's also why it can look so differently. And so I think if people take a step back, say what's really important. And I've heard this from so many people of, COVID's given me a chance to really reflect on what's important to me. Yeah, that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Use, what is important to you? How are you making your decisions? And then looking for ways that you can express those values throughout the week, and things will feel much better. Because that's what we're seeking, are those expressions. And that's why somebody can, who loves one activity, one sport, one thing, and suddenly gets exposed to something else that actually expresses the same values as that activity that they were doing, why that also feels so good, even though they look completely different. And so, if yeah, whatever value it is that you're trying to express, make sure that you found a way that you can tick it off, once a week, once a day, whatever, however often you want that value to be expressed, find a way to do it within the means that you currently have.
I like that. Thank you. And if anyone is looking to get a hold of you, Greg, for some coaching or any of the services that you offer, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so I, in person, I'm at COR.E Chiropractic and Wellness Center, where I do my manual therapy, my movement training, as well as life coaching. So we can do that in person. We can do that over the phone as well, very similar to this. So either email is a great way to just initiate the conversation, and then we can set up from there, whether that's call, whether that's in person. And gregmosscoaching at gmail.com is an easy way to get a hold of me email wise.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
No
Always
problem.
a pleasure. Always a pleasure. I look forward to the next time that
Yeah.
I just get to land with you. And